Hello and welcome to the TID Water and Power Podcast. I'm your host, Constance Anderson, and on this month's episode, we're discussing customer research. As a community-owned utility, it's important for TID to understand the needs of our customers and understand how we can continue to meet expectations. Customer satisfaction surveys are a key part of receiving feedback from our community to understand those needs and expectations. On this episode, I'm joined by CEO of GreatBlue Research, Michael Vigeant, to discuss the purpose of customer surveys, the approach to designing surveys, and the results of TID's recent customer satisfaction surveys. Michael, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Constance. Thank you, as always, for having me and looking forward to the discussion.
Absolutely. So to start out, tell us a little bit about GreatBlue Research and how you specifically kind of came into this industry.
It's actually kind of a really fun story, I think. The company itself was founded in 1979 by my mentor and counselor at Camp for Kids with Cancer when I was 12 years old. So Jerry, my mentor, founded the company, as I mentioned, 1979. He became a mentor of mine when we met at that camp and stayed a mentor all through high school, into college, and after college. We had a conversation about what I wanted to do. And at the time, in the data world, there was a lot of really deep data people and there wasn't the whole storytelling component of data research really hadn't been on the forefront as of yet. And Jerry just said, "Hey, listen, how are you in math and data?" I said, "I love it. I'm good at it." And he said, "Because I know you're good at the storytelling piece, and I think you could be really good in this industry." And prior to that, I had actually been doing some data for the Hartford Whalers, the NHL hockey team that sadly no longer exists in Connecticut. But I was working for the team, got my start in statistics. So I understood data. I understood how it worked. And with that, 27 years later, after joining Jerry with the company, it's been a great ride. It's been a great career. And I took over the company in 2010. So for the last 17 years or so, I've been at the helm, but it started way back actually at age 12.
That's wild. That's some longevity there.
Yeah,
Very
for
cool.
sure.
Good. All right. So you mentioned that GreatBlue was founded in 1979, but tell us a little bit more about the company itself.
Yeah, so it really started out as a political candidate consulting firm. Jerry was very much into politics and that angle of the business and realizing, I think, pretty quickly when candidates either did or did not win their elections, bills didn't always get paid. So there was this whole, when you're starting a business and bootstrapping and things of that nature, it's like, where can we count on some regular or regulated, or managed type industries? And that's where really kind of the utilities and healthcare really became two of those primary industries way back then and actually still to this point today. So utilities, I was never really that interested in the political side of the arena, but utilities and healthcare really were very strong interests for me. Obviously, utilities are those organizations that you have a relationship with when you're a homeowner or a renter, whatever the case may be. But on the healthcare side, as a cancer survivor, there was always that element of the experience that was always really important to me as well. So those two industries really shaped what the business was back then for one reason, and then really shaped what the industries were for me for different reasons. And even then, as I got into and really started to understand utilities predominantly, and that's really kind of what brings us together, I really found that I had a passion for it. And then really, as I came into the industry, was right around the time that electricity was deregulating across the country. Sure. So our firm took 7 different states through the process of deregulation. So from day one of being in this industry, I was working on large utility related projects and fell in love with it. Jump ahead a number of years after I had taken over the business in 2010, in 2014, we really started, even though we had worked with public power utilities all along, we were really noticed by the industry, by the American Public Power Association, and they were looking for, at the time, someone to really be a partner that could help them drive data for their industry, they wanted to be a voice or the voice of public power data. And so they were looking for a firm that kind of had the chops and could help them accomplish that goal. And that's where our relationship with APPA was founded, through Hometown Connections, another organization in the industry. And we created what is now known as the Public Power Data Source. And so it is a study nationally that we do. We collect 3,000 completed surveys among public power customers on behalf of utilities across the country. And what that does is it's now given APPA that voice of being the voice of public power. We drive all the research, and for our clients like you, we're able to bring that data into the work that we do for you individually, for your customers, but how well you're doing in your state, how well you're doing in your region, how well you're doing across the country. And obviously, comparing a Northeast utility to a Southern California utility has different customers, but reliability is still a thing. Rates is still a thing, and understanding what drives that. So pretty cool stuff.
Yeah. Well, and oftentimes, we'll say the utility industry is not necessarily sexy, but when you realize like how foundational it is, it's an important, you can't escape it in any part of your daily life. So we certainly appreciate GreatBlue's interest in and appreciation for, what we do. So thanks for being such a great partner that way.
Oh, our pleasure. Thank you.
And I know it's not, just, utilities, just public power or even IOUs that you guys work with. There are multiple industries, as you mentioned, healthcare that is one that you have a particular interest in. But what other sort of industries does GreatBlue work with?
Yeah. So what's great about the research and insights industry is, and when we're asking folks to come to work for us, our number one core value is supremely optimistic, right? And and what that also falls into is being insanely curious, right? And so when you take optimism and curiosity, those are two foundations for research. And so with research, you can, as long as you're curious and you know how to ask the right questions and really understand what folks' needs, challenges, issues, decisions to be made, the process applies to anything. So to your point, healthcare is something that we do. We work with manufacturers across the country, some on the side of utilities, some on the side of consumer product goods. We've been involved in many, many different products that you may use at your own home, ranging from vacuum cleaners to ice machines to fishing reels and rods. But we also work with agriculture. We do quite a bit in the agriculture space, whether it is branding, technology, whether it is in what we'll talk about later, how growers and folks, utilize their resources and how they plan. And so there's a lot of different industries that we work with. But in addition to public power on the utility side, we do a lot with the investor-owned utilities as well. And that's not just electric, that's gas, that's water, and even broadband and cable as well. So it's all different types of organizations that we're doing work with. We work with municipalities, developing budgets for their communities. We've worked with communities that were expecting major events, whether it was a U.S. Open golf tournament in Pinehurst, North Carolina, prior to one of the U.S. Opens. We worked with the village of Pinehurst to really work through traffic situations and how to address big groups of people coming in for a very short stay. So it's always something new. It's always something different, and it keeps it exciting for us.
Oh, that's awesome. Very good. So, Michael, why is it important for organizations like TID to conduct customer satisfaction surveys?
There's a great number of reasons, but I think that the number one reason is data quite simply is and always has been powerful. It allows you to really understand what you're doing is hitting the necessary target or acting on the necessary desired behaviors, and that what your goals and your ideas are in terms of how you want the relationship between the utility, in your case, and the customer or the audiences that you serve, what that relationship looks like and what you strive for it to look like. Data and research is helping you to understand, Are you hitting those marks? Are there areas for adjustment? Are there needs that your customers have that you're not meeting? Or are there needs that you're meeting that they just don't know about? Sometimes what we find, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is that sometimes folks will ask you for a product or a service that you're already delivering on. In that case, it's a perceived expectation not being met, when in reality, it's just an awareness thing. They don't know that you deliver that service. So it's closing a communication gap. And so times change. Things don't always stay the same. And so that customer survey and that customer data allows you to understand what's changing. And even more recently, when we see this nationally, that, kind of young to middle 20 something audience, ranging to kind of that below 40 something audience, predominantly doesn't want to speak to live people. They predominantly don't want to interact with you face to face. They want to do it on their time, through a portal, digitally, electronically. They want to have an app. But what they're also telling us is if there's an important need, they want to have that ability to get in touch with someone. But that's a big shift. When you look at your traditional kind of baby boomer generation, they're used to that face to face. They're used to that interaction, interpersonal communication, and they still in many cases desire that, even though many of those boomers are now saying, well, it's a lot easier than running down the street to the front office. I can do this on the app or electronically. So that's just one example of a shift that has taken place and how utilities are using this data to better serve that younger audience, but also understanding how to continue servicing that older audience who has different expectations and desires for that communication.
Right. So how can an organization like TID use that feedback that we receive from our surveys?
Generally speaking, the three things that kind of come out of these surveys are really awareness, knowledge, satisfaction. And what I mean by that, and I mentioned this earlier, if I want you to offer an energy efficiency program and I'm taking this survey and I say, hey, I'd like TID to offer energy efficiency programs, and you're looking at the data going, but we already do that, right? That is a lack of awareness issue. Sure. So now all of a sudden that drives communication to say, hey, for all of those that just took our survey, thank you so much for taking the time. This is why we do it. We learned a number of folks were unaware of our energy service programs, or energy efficiency programs. As a reminder, on our website, you can find X, Y, and Z. Yeah. Or we're in the process of launching a new energy efficiency program. Be on the lookout in XYZ date. And all of that information is driving what folks like yourself are doing on the back end. How we draft our communications, where we're getting that information from, and where we're providing it and presenting it to.
Yeah. And I think from TID's perspective, it's helped us kind of take some of those assumptions that we have about our customer base and really prove them out or not, so that we know, who we're working with and what those expectations are. We've tested a couple different things throughout our survey process. We've been working with GreatBlue for 10 years now on our, retail electric customer survey. And one of the things we tried was community owned. Do our customers understand what that means when we use that term? And is there an appreciation for that? And so we tried it in survey, and I think it was 2021. We ran a campaign to try and increase that understanding, and then surveyed on that again in 2024 and saw an increase. And so we were like, okay, we know we're making improvements here. So it's a great opportunity for us to kind of evaluate, not just us guessing what that knowledge level is amongst our customer base, but actually polling them on that and getting real responses from them about a specific topic.
Yeah. And that's a crazy one for me, right? But there's a lot of logic to it, right? So the value of folks understanding your community owned. Well, why does that matter, Michael? I get asked that question all the time. There's a lot of reasons it matters. Number one, we know nationally and in every state that we work, when folks have a true understanding of what public power means or what community owned means, they have a much higher value and level of satisfaction and level of interest in that utility. And why is it? Because it is your neighbors that are working with you and for you. It means that revenues from the utility are going back into the community. They're not going to shareholders like an investor owned. And so once folks understand that, they have a higher opinion, and it is a direct correlation from that knowledge to community-owned public power utilities generally have a higher level of satisfaction than their investor-owned counterpart. There's tons of data that supports that statement.
Sure. And I want to go back to a point that you brought up earlier about it's often that customers aren't dissatisfied, they're just unaware, because that's another thing that TID specifically has gained knowledge from in understanding what our customers are aware of and what they're not. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah. It's funny. A lot of times if there's let's call it 75% positive rating, I'll say to everybody, okay, what's the opposite of the 75% rating? And everybody will say 25% negative. I go, no, actually, there's two other components. So there's negative, but in addition to that, there's neutral. And then there's also don't know. So someone who just moved into your service territory, when you say, hey, how would you rate TID on rates, reliability, being a good community partner? They may say, I don't know. I just moved here. I've only been in town for 3 weeks. So in many cases, what we'll do is we'll look at the data with don't know responses included in the data, because ultimately that will drive your ratings a little bit lower. But also at the same token, we'll look at the data removing don't knows, because generally speaking, in your case, I can speak to when don't knows are removed, the ratings go higher. And what that means is of those who knew enough to provide a response, it is generally positive. That's not always the case for other organizations. You remove don't know, sometimes their ratings go down, right? That's not the case here. So to be clear to your listeners, but don't knows do have an impact on data. What we love to see, and more often than not, it is not dissatisfaction. It is just lack of awareness. And more often than not, we always say if your dissatisfieds are kind of under that 6, 7, 8% in general, but in many cases, they also have valid issues, complaints, or needs. And we want to hear from them just as much as we want to hear from the satisfied, because that's how the data becomes valuable. And so that's a couple of examples of how we look at the negative to help drive and understand, was there a particular interaction that just didn't go well, right? Was there a piece of knowledge that they just didn't have that would have driven their rating in a different direction? So it's understanding what people don't know, but also understanding what they do know and why they're happy or not about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so now I want to move a little bit more over to the kind of methodology side. So let's take a look at the two surveys that TID has completed recently. As I mentioned, we did a customer satisfaction survey of our electric customers in 2024. And then just this year in 2025, we did our first ever customer satisfaction survey of our irrigation customer population. So at a high level, can you tell me a little bit about each of these surveys that GreatBlue conducted for us?
Absolutely. And as you mentioned earlier, we've been working with you all for a decade now, which is amazing. So thank you for your continued partnership and business. We really appreciate it. But this was an exciting one, right? So when we look at the electric, technically there was actually two surveys that we did for you on the electric side, in 2024. One was among residential customers and one was among commercial customers. And in those two surveys, we captured 445 residential customers and 100 commercial. And we'll talk a little bit later about margins for errors and all that sort of stuff. This year in the irrigation study, that survey was conducted July to September of 2025. And there was a total of 242 completed surveys in that grouping that we did as well. So really good sample sizes and pretty happy with the results that we saw there.
But now some people might take a look at those sample sizes and say, well, 445 customers out of a organization that serves 240,000, is this really a good sample size for understanding the proclivities of your customer base?
Yeah. So great question. And really, I always use this analogy and folks that don't study statistics are always like, kind of help me understand this from a layman's terms. And I always say this one because most folks seem to get it. For example, when your doctor tests your cholesterol, he or she does not take out all of your blood. They take a sample of your blood, right? And so sample sizes are scientifically and mathematically developed. And there's a couple of key variables and I won't get into all of the weeds with it, but generally speaking, if you think about it, there's the audience size. There is, who we're looking to speak to. And then there's a margin for error and a confidence level that we work with. So, from that standpoint, we're looking to see margins for error, generally speaking, under 5%. Because that means if we were to replicate the survey 100 times in a margin for error of plus or minus 5% at a 95% confidence level, the data that we captured for you in the first round of surveys would differ no more than 5 percentage points if we replicated that study 100 times. So if we spoke to those 445 customers or 445 different customers over 100 studies, the results would still come back within a plus or minus margin of error. Now, when you look at the commercial audience, that 100 completed, or the irrigation customers at 242, there's a much smaller audience size. So in order to achieve a solid margin for error, we don't have to speak to as many people because it's a smaller audience. Now, conversely, if we took 445 on a national level, the margin for error would go up because there's a lot more people in the national audience than there are just in your service territory. So there's all kinds of formulas and calculations that allow us to get to sampling. Now, we track that against census block and group block information. So as you look at the census, how the demographics are broken out by age, income, education level, all those different things, as well as the street in which you live on and the number of households in your community. We want ultimately the sample to look like a representative reflection of the community or the audience that we're serving.
Let's talk about how the surveys are conducted. You mentioned that kind of switch from phone surveys to digital, but how did TID conduct their most recent surveys?
Yeah, so there's been an evolution. When you really think back to when we first started working together, it was all phone that we were doing. And customers would give us, or our clients would give us a list of customers and we would randomly sample by phone, call center, the whole 9 yards. As COVID hit, and folks were spending all day on Zoom calls and team meetings, the phone completion rates really dropped off. Pre-COVID, we were completing a telephone survey out of about every 50 numbers dialed. Now, that didn't mean of every 50 people we got on the phone. It would be 50 dials. Maybe 20 people would pick up the phone. We'd get answering machines. We'd get busy signals. We would get, no answers. That was the metric. 1 out of every 50 dials resulted in a completed survey. Pre-COVID. Post-COVID, that jumped up and continued to rise. Now it's somewhere in the neighborhood, depending on the audience, 1 out of about every 200 to 300 dials result in a phone completed survey.
That does not sound nearly as efficient as other methods.
And it's extremely costly. So what was great about that from a cost perspective, that's where digital really took off. Again, digital was happening pre-COVID, but this was really where that tech shift happened. And folks said, I'm happy to do it. I'm tired of being on the call. I'm tired of staring at a screen. I'll answer it. Shoot me the email and I'll do it. So what we've seen as of recently and including 2024, we moved to an all digital because we're having really high success rates with it. We are not just seeing young people doing it. We're seeing folks of all ages. So we're still getting that representative sample of young to older. I never want to call anybody old, but we're getting young to older answering those surveys. And based on the demographics, we can still make that sample look like the audiences that you're surveying. thing. And we've also found with that shift to digital, we can actually ask a few more questions. Now, generally speaking, the surveys that we've done for you have been somewhere in the mid 30s, kind of 35 to 50 questions in length. And again, that includes the demographic questions. That also includes a number of different rating questions. And people say, wow, 50 questions? That's a lot. Well, we designed the surveys to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 5 minutes because we know that is an attention span that most folks will do for their utility, but we also have to make that survey easy for them to complete. So there might be 15 questions that is, please rate TID on the following using a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 means X and 10 means Y. Now I'm just clicking on the button for each of those things. So 15 questions you may get through in under a minute, right? Now, all of a sudden, it's no longer about the count. It's about how we ask the question.
Great. And I'm glad you mentioned kind of the structure of the questions, because I wanted to ask you next about, so we've decided we're going to do this survey. What is GreatBlue's approach to kind of designing this survey instrument, and how do you determine what questions get asked?
Yeah. So, we touched upon this briefly earlier, but it always starts with the problems that you all need to solve or information that you need to know about from your customers. And sometimes that is, and I think you mentioned it earlier, hey, we have the assumption or we assume customers think this, or we believe they think that. This is our opportunity to confirm that, because what they know and what they don't know drives what you do and what you don't do. So that's really important. So generally speaking, we'll start a meeting with, okay, what problems and challenges are you having? Or problems and challenges your customers know or perceive you're having. All right. Are there any big changes coming? I think I mentioned earlier, a rate change, a capital improvement, a new product, a new service. And then from there, we're going to draft the research instrument specific to those goals, and kind of how I keep our clients on track without getting too far down the road with nice to have information versus what's useful is, how will we use this information to make a decision for the business? Also, we want to know how you're doing. Overall satisfaction. Again, we talked about programs and services. Do we have the right mix of products and services for our customers that are meeting their needs? And if the answer is yes, how well are the programs or services or products meeting those needs? And are there tweaks or adjustments that need to be made? We also want to really understand how folks view the value of service that they receive from you as compared to the rates they pay. There's a lot of correlation. Nobody loves paying bills. Let me get that out on the table. I'm sure it's a huge shocker. Nobody likes paying bills, but there is a strong correlation between the value that I get for the money I spend. And so it's always about understanding that. And if there's a rate increase, most folks are more accepting of a rate increase when their utility or their service provider is communicating where that money's going, how costs have gone up, but most importantly, what you all are doing to use money wisely, to manage money wisely, to be efficient with the money that your ratepayers are giving you. And so sometimes it's like, okay, I understand costs went up for, equipment or technology, and we need to do a big infrastructure improvement. Well, somebody's got to pay for that. And as long as customers understand where the money's going and that you're doing everything that you can to be efficient with funds, folks are usually a bit more, and I'll give you a great example. In one of the states where we do work with a lot of public power as well as investor-owned utilities, during a major storm, and this goes back probably about 10 years or so ago, but there was a state that got hit with a series of storms back to back to back. And there was two major IOUs that we were working with. One of those IOUs was very intentional about communicating even when they had no new news. They were like, we don't have any new updates. but as soon as we do, we will get back to you. They were extremely proactive about how they communicated what was coming with the storms, why they hadn't gotten to your neighborhood, when they anticipated, what they were doing to try to resolve that. The other utility, and we worked with both of them, the other utility was sitting there saying, well, there's nothing we're going to say to make anybody happy. So we're just going to only give them updates when we have them, and then we're going to go about our business. And that was a reactive approach versus a proactive approach. The difference in customer satisfaction index numbers for those utilities a month later, now each one of them dropped. Okay. Now the one that dropped the least was the one that was really proactive, and they dropped by about 4 percentage points. The ones that ignored communication dropped by 13 percentage points.
Oh, wow.
So just communication during a time of storms and overly communicating, say, we're thinking of you, we're doing everything we can. That was all folks wanted. I don't want to have to keep coming to you for updates.
Yeah.
Come to me.
Yeah.
And the same applies during rate increases. And those are the types of things that we're looking at: satisfaction, services, rates and value, outages, and again, I think I mentioned it earlier, but when you look at awareness or knowledge, reliability, how we communicate with you, preferences, these all boil down to when you start breaking out the data by a new customer compared to a tenured or longer tenured customer, how people think about you with respect to awareness and knowledge is really important. Understanding satisfaction by newer customers versus older customers, those who had an outage versus those who didn't. And I think importantly, when you look at the communication preferences, and we talked a little bit about that earlier as well.
Yeah. And I know we talked a little bit about kind of the questions that lead to additional questions earlier, but I really appreciate that about the design of the survey is you're going to ask a customer, does this situation pertain to you? And then depending on if they say yes or no, that's going to take them down a path of more specific questions to that situation. And I think that really helps us get to some good information as well, specific to those folks that have had that experience.
Yeah, and I think it's an important distinction because I don't want all of your listeners to think every time I get a survey from GreatBlue on behalf of TID, it's going to be 50 questions. Because in that situation, we may have 50 or 60 questions in the final survey instrument. But to your point, Constance, as folks had an interaction with customer service or didn't, they go down different paths. So we'll build into each survey 4 or 5 different question tree paths based on that experience. So the totality of questions may be 60 in that survey instrument, but for each path, it might be closer to 25 or 30, based on what they ask. And there's going to be some questions that are asked to everybody. And then there's going to be specific instance related questions that they do or do not get asked based on that. And then they all come back together at the end to answer the demographics or, a question that may apply to all of them, regardless of their experience or not.
Right. And that's another tool that TID often incorporates into their surveys is asking the same question year to year to year so we can see that trend in how folks are answering. Is the understanding increasing? Is it decreasing? So I think that's another important tool that's factored into the survey design.
Yeah. And typically when we're writing surveys, we kind of view it as 3 different blocks of questions. The first is core questions. What are our important questions, to your point, that we need to track from study to study to see what that trend is? Up, down, staying the same, whatever the case may be. The second block is really kind of what we'll call custom questions. Needs, issues, challenges, things that are happening at that moment in time.
Specific
whether it is
to that utility or that customer.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. Specific to their strategic plan. Again, we want to drive decisions for the business. We want to drive actionable insights for the business, for the utility. We want them to know, okay, we have this topic that we're dealing with. Our customers clearly say they want us to go in this direction. Let's go in that direction. Let's communicate how we're doing it and let's move forward. The third group of questions is what I really refer to as kind of the market. And that's really, is there a new product or a new service or a new program that you need from us? Is there an unmet or undermet need that we need to start thinking about that maybe you all hadn't thought about, right? And so that's where the market is defined by what they expect to see from you or would like to see from you. And so, that's generally a high level framework of how we're looking at those surveys.
Very good. So like you mentioned, customer preferences are always changing. Generational preferences are always changing. So because of this kind of constant change, how often does GreatBlue recommend organizations complete these surveys?
Yeah, I think that, the borderline or the bottom line answer is once a year. But it still really boils down to your ability to address the data. And if you have something that's happening in real time, that you need more frequent data, then that's where you may go to a little bit more of a transactional experience. And we see this when folks are rolling out a new technology, for example. And in some cases, I'll go back to the cholesterol analogy. We don't want to check our cholesterol right after the holidays, which just recently passed, because it's going to show a different story. But just like that data would tell us that our cholesterols may be up after all those holiday meals, we also want to understand that in some cases, if we just had a major outage or we just had an increase or we just launched a new service technology or meter reading technology or whatever the case may be, we may need to get a pulse on how that impacted customer experience, customer needs, customer satisfaction. So sometimes it's applicable to do an additional pulse survey right before or right after something big is coming. But generally speaking, once a year.
Okay. And let's talk a little bit more about the timing, because like you mentioned, if we know something's coming or right after we've implemented something, that might be an important time to survey customers. But kind of talk about timing in general. So I know, for example, when we surveyed our irrigation customers for the first time, we made sure to do that in the middle of irrigation season, when these topics are hot on their mind, when their expectations of TID are high. And so that was kind of some important timing for us to consider. What are some other just general timing issues that you want to think about if you're thinking about doing a survey?
Yeah. So every customer of ours, every client of ours is a little different. So some folks like to survey during what they call kind of the shoulder season, before it gets too hot, maybe, before it gets too cold. Staying away from outage season, things of that nature, because you do get blips in the radar. If I've just gotten a high bill, I'm going to be a little bit more sensitive to my bill in the heat of summer. And so each of our clients will work with them to identify what are the goals of the study, what will timing do to that study. Will it help it? Will it hinder it? I always recommend, and most folks will take the recommendation, when there's a rate increase coming for utilities, we always say, let's get out ahead of it. Let's ask what folks know. Let's understand how they compare your rates to your value. Let's understand if they, because that's the opportunity to say, rates aren't just raised arbitrarily. Right. There's a reason for them. So, in that standpoint, I always recommend to our clients, go out ahead of time and say, we need to raise rates for the following reasons. Bing, bing, bing. Would you rather we X? Would you rather we Y? Some cases it's, would you like to see a bigger increase once or smaller increases over periods of time? That's one I think that's really important to get out ahead of time, because it really is a knowledge and awareness thing.
That makes sense. All right. So kind of going back to that discussion about the methodology of the surveys, can you kind of tell us a little bit about the evolution of GreatBlue's approach to surveys?
Yeah. I mean,
or surveying.
When I started with the company in 1998, it was phone and it was mail. We were literally printing out surveys and mailing them out to folks with return envelopes, and they'd mail them back. Over time, and even going back to like 2013, 2014, we were implementing QR codes into some of the work that we were doing. And they never really stuck. And what was really interesting to me, it was COVID when QR codes came back and they were like the big thing. And I was like, wait a second, we were doing that 7-8 years ago.
We've been doing this forever.
And they never really took off. But that's where you really started to see the digital transformation coming back. And now it's predominantly digital, as we talked a little bit about earlier. But what's cool about like QR codes and digital and all that sort of stuff. Now, one of the things I mentioned is that we can capture a lot more data for you at no additional cost, and in many cases a lower cost, which is great. But the speed from project initiation to project completion is a fraction of the time. What in 1998, it felt very much like the Mad Men television show. It would take months to get a survey done. What used to take 3 to 4 months in the 90s, we can now do in 3 to 4 days.
Wow.
Which is crazy for a fraction of the price. So there's that part. But then on the digital side, there's also a lot of quality control pieces as well. We can control how many times an IP address or a customer is allowed to take a survey, which allows us to limit kind of stuffing the ballot box, if you will. So, although we can receive many, many surveys, you mentioned that, the hundreds of thousands of customers that you survey. Theoretically, if every single one of your customers answered the survey, we can incorporate that data into, but we could also limit it to one survey per household answers that survey, or two, if you wanted to give, both heads of household the opportunity to do that. So, it has really changed over time. And I'm kind of blessed in the sense that I'm young enough to have watched all of this, take place, but old enough to also see all of this take place. So my entry into this insights community in the late 90s, right out of college, allowed me to see all of these shifts in technology and the inclusion of all of this technology, into the process. So I understood it and learned it longhand, but then got all the cheat codes of all of the efficiencies and technology along the years to say, okay. And that actually has allowed me to coach and teach in this industry as well. Hey, this is the long way of thinking for your clients, but here are all the efficiencies that you get, right? Yeah. So, it's been pretty neat.
Well, and I suppose part of that too is just understanding that the folks that you're surveying, that their, tolerances, let's say, have changed. Their attention spans have gotten smaller. Their desire for digital versus, as you said, longhand, has changed. So not only is the process changing, but it has to change along with the customer need.
For sure.
All right. Okay. So let's dive into some results now. So as I mentioned, TID has recently conducted the 2 different surveys, one of our electric customers, both residential and commercial, and then a new one for our irrigation customers. So let's start with the electric customer survey. Give us some highlights.
Yeah. So first and foremost, just like school grades, we always want to look at what the expectation is in terms of these ratings. So I'll be able to rattle off a bunch of them in just a minute, but from a contextual standpoint, we want to be thinking about customer service ratings or customer satisfaction ratings. Generally in high 70s, low to mid 80s is generally viewed. 80% in many arenas is viewed as world-class customer service, right? So although a certain car insurance company with the little green character claims a 99% customer satisfaction index number, it's not always that way, right? Because of those don't knows and neutral ratings that we talked about. Generally speaking, when we see high 70s, low to mid 80s, those are usually higher performing utilities, right? So that being said, when we looked at across an average of all customer company characteristics, so there was 9 total characteristics. Remember, I mentioned earlier the first number of questions, maybe 10 or 12 questions with that same grading scale. This is what I was referring to. So when we look at company characteristics, and they include, overall customer service, field service, reliability, rates, all those sorts of things. We saw 85.5% average positive rating across the residential customers, 93.6% average satisfaction among commercial customers. These are usually a little bit more savvy folks because that bill is part of their company budget. So they dive into it a little bit more. So that's a higher knowledge customer than your residential. In both cases, really high numbers. And we saw both of those were increases over 2021 survey. To give you a couple of examples on the residential side, 88.6% reported TID is responding promptly to customers, 90.5% reliable infrastructure, 82.2% community involvement, up from 74.6% in 2021. And that's also correlated to that higher number of folks recognizing and realizing that you are a community-owned municipal utility. We saw on the residential side, 86.2% say that you're providing good service and value for the cost. So again, lots of those mid 80s to low 90s kind of across the board on the residential side. When we look at the commercial side, some really awesome ratings here. 98.9% of commercial customers say you're responding promptly to customers. 96.9% helpful and knowledgeable staff. 97% overall satisfaction. And then 92.8% of your commercial customers say you're providing good service and value for the cost. So really high ratings kind of across the board for both residential and commercial.
Yeah, we're pretty proud of those numbers. So we'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but how do these numbers kind of compare to statewide or national averages?
Yeah, great question. And so, we mentioned and talked a little bit earlier about the public power data source and part of that product, for GreatBlue as well as APPA came out of the very question you just asked me, being asked of us for years and years and years. How do we compare? And so, the answer to your question is, generally speaking, we see 17 to 23 points higher on average TID is doing compared to national and state counterparts. And in some cases, 20 to 25 percentage points higher for certain categories. And I think what's really important here is, and I've been presenting on this very topic across the country, in different states and at different arenas. And folks are asking me all the time, what does a higher performing utility look like? What are they doing to achieve those scores? It is community owned knowledge. It is, reliability. It's having a solid rating for rates as compared to value. And that's not always just a numerical value. That is, in order for folks to rate you highly on that, they need to understand what you do to protect their rates, what you do to keep their rates low. Understand what the comparable rates are to other utilities, communities, investor owns, and so forth. And having that public power data source information, we can tell you what's happening in California. We can tell you what's happening nationally. And so that's what we're doing. And so where we're consulting with our clients on which areas to focus on, lowering those don't knows, making sure that a first contact resolution occurs, because we all know if we have to keep calling our utility or any service provider for that matter to keep getting an update on how the product or how our issue or resolution is going, we get increasingly more frustrated versus if we have that one contact and the utility is constantly providing us with the update. That makes a big difference. So those are all, those are a few things, but we're seeing kind of across the board, generally speaking, on almost every question, you're seeing 17 to 23 percentage points higher on average, but in some categories, 20 to 25. So that's real good stuff.
Awesome. Well, we don't like to brag on ourselves too often, but I'm happy to let you do that for us. So thanks for sharing those results.
Well, and listen, Constance, that's also part of what you get after 10 years of asking your customers, how are we doing? And taking the information and doing stuff with it, right? And so that is not just it happens. You've made that happen by putting in the work and understanding what the expectations of your customers are and then delivering and always constantly striving to deliver on those expectations.
No, that's a very good point. And we certainly take the information seriously and try to make those improvements. So thank you for recognizing that. Let's talk specifically now about some of the customer service satisfaction results of the electric survey.
Yeah. So I'll start with commercial this time. 100% satisfaction with customer service experience for commercial respondents. And that's 2 studies in a row. So that's about as high as it gets. And that stems also from 97% of commercial customers saying that TID meets their expectations all or most of the time. And listen, you have to have a good relationship with those commercial customers because again, it's a part of their budget. It's a part of their operations. If they're not in power, they're not making money. They're losing money. So having that relationship and you understanding what they need and delivering on that is really important. So they're rating you accordingly. On the residential side, very similar numbers. We saw 91.2% satisfied with customer service experience. Now that is down from 96.1% in 2021, but within that margin of error that I talked about. It might have been after a few more cupcakes at the holidays with that cholesterol. But once we get into the 90s, we're not worried if you're 91 one year and 95 the next, or 95 one year and 92 the next. It's staying in the 90s. When you're talking customer service and that sort of stuff, when we're in the 90s, what we worry about and what we're looking for is if we went from 96 to 91 to 85 to 80. That's a trend downward. We want to capture that. But in this particular case, you're still within that margin for error. So we're not too worried about that. On the residential side, continuing on, we saw 87.8% said TID meets expectations all or most of the time. Again, within that margin of error, there was a 0.3 percentage point drop from 2021. So statistically and mathematically, that is unchanged. So we're not worried about that. And that's just kind of the nature of the surveys. And just as a reminder, it's not the same people answering your survey every time. It is different people answering your survey every time. Now, is it possible that 1 or 2 customers may have participated in the survey in 2021 as well as 2024? Absolutely. But generally speaking, it's a new sample each and every time.
And I would say that that's definitely something that we're watching, right? We saw that little drop. And there could be a perfectly good reason to explain that. It could be a different set of customers we're talking to. But certainly when we do the next survey, if we see another little drop, even if it's very, very tiny, we need to assess that and we need to figure out why that's going down. What has changed over the course of those years that has made that continuously go down? So that's a good thing to point out and definitely something that we're keeping an eye on.
For sure. And from our end, we're diving in. If those changes start happening, we start diving into the demographics. Now, I will never, by law, I can never tell you that Jane Smith at 123 Main Street was unhappy with your survey or your service. All I can give to my clients is the aggregate data. So the totality of all the people that answered the survey. What I can do is say, hey, those people that were dissatisfied all fell in this demographic range or fell in this zip code range or fell inside of this service interaction range or whatever the case may be. So we can usually narrow it down to help you understand. It might have been a high bill question or it was multiple contacts to get an issue resolved or whatever the case may be. So we can typically narrow down what's driving it. But we, by law, don't give you the names because we do say to every respondent that their information, their personal information will remain confidential.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we mentioned earlier that one of the important reasons for conducting a survey like this is to kind of assess what customers' expectations are. Can you talk a little bit about what came out of the survey results as far as customer expectations, both on the residential and commercial side?
Yeah. So, the top 2, for both commercial and residential customers were competitive / low rates and providing reliable service. Right. And so, low rates can sometimes be subjective to folks. That's why we also put in the word kind of competitive. We want to make sure that everybody wants low rates, right? But, competitive allows folks to be a little bit more fair in saying, hey, listen, we need to be in the ballpark of competitiveness. If we're a little higher and we're getting more service for that, that's okay. But that is, keep our rates at a good place remain competitive, but also help us understand where that money's going and that you're doing everything to protect that. And then also reliable service. And that's not uncommon. Those two expectations are not uncommon. And in many cases, both of those expectations are out of your control, right? In totality, there's things that you can do to maintain competitive rates. There are things that you can do to maintain reliable service. But if a major storm hits and takes out power lines and transformers, that's out of your control. But how well you get it back up is in your control. And so it's understanding those things. And those are not uncommon expectations. But we've also seen in your ratings that you do a great job in both of those arenas in those areas that you can control.
Thank you for that. And what about changes in customer preferences? You mentioned earlier just the way customers prefer to be communicated with. What did we see from the results in that area?
Yeah, that's probably nationally one of the biggest changes that we've also seen since COVID is that preference for communication. Just to give you a couple of examples for you all on the residential side, those folks who want information from you through bill inserts actually increased to 29.7% from 17.2% in 2021. Text messages, which were barely on the map at 1.5% in 2021, are now preferred by almost 18% of customers wanting that text message. No surprise, right? We have that phone with us all the time.
Yep.
A quick text message from our utility saying, hey, there's an outage or you've been restored keeps us moving through our day. Email and the website, which were previously the top two, dropped to 17.3% and 14.2% respectively. So still 15 percentage points on average. Folks are looking to email in your website, but we're seeing that bill insert and those text communications increasing pretty dramatically. Now on the commercial side, email continues to be the top choice and moved to 37% from 27.2%. And just like the residential counterpart, the website dropped to 11% from 25.2%. So your commercial customers are really relying on that direct communication from TID and not as much on the website. But there's still a population that are going there if they need it.
From one survey to another, there are always specific topics that we want to survey our customers about because we know that there are going to be impacts, eventual or in the near future. So some of those that we included recently were about RPS mandates or reliable portfolio standards, as what that stands for, and electrification. What did we see on the results pertaining to those topics specifically?
This is one of those great examples of knowledge and ratings, right? So what I mean by that is, let's just start with the impact of the RPS mandates. 41.3% of residential customers and 57% of commercial customers expected rates to double with RPS mandates. 13% of residential and 16% of commercial expected rates to triple. So helping folks understand what the reality there is, and that is a perception thing. So when we go to it, I don't have that question in front of me, but I don't believe we projected what the impact would be because we wanted to understand what the perception was. So a big number, almost half or 2/5 for residential and more than half for commercial, said that it would either double or triple. Now, when you look to gauge interest in electrification, over half of residential and commercial customers were not interested in switching to electric appliances and equipment. And you think about restaurants. Many chefs say, I'd rather cook over a live flame than over an electric heat. So in many cases, the surveys here are helping us connect the dots. But it is also important to add those real-time questions, add those different needs or directions that the utility may be going in, again, so that you all can connect the dots behind the scenes.
Absolutely. And so I think sometimes just when our customers take the survey, it helps to kind of, switch that light bulb on of like, oh, that makes sense. Of course, we want to be renewable, but there's a cost associated with that, and I'm going to end up paying that cost. So it kind of helps to create that underlying knowledge, so to speak, just by reading the question and taking the survey. So I think that's another kind of benefit that's sort of baked into doing a survey like this. All right, so let's jump over then to the irrigation survey results. As I mentioned before, this was the first time that we had done a full customer satisfaction survey for our irrigation customers. And so what did we learn from this survey?
So one thing we haven't talked about today is when we're creating the survey, we create those buckets, right? We talked about core and custom in the market. But when you think about how a book has chapters, a survey has chapters or areas for investigation. And with the grower survey, we had a couple of different chapters. So there was overall satisfaction. There was overall quality of service. There was water distribution operator trust, the online water system, communication opportunities related to community-owned, irrigation rules, strategic planning, all that sort of stuff. So we covered a lot of those topics throughout the survey. Now, to give you some ratings in each of those, what we saw and what we were happy to see was a lot of consistencies with what we saw in your residential and commercial surveys. So when we think about the average of those organizational characteristics, we saw 98.8% overall satisfaction. We saw 95% communicating with customers about irrigation water availability and why. We saw 91.7% quality of service, so really good there. And as we dove into overall quality of service from an expectation standpoint, we saw 92.1% reported TID meets their expectations all or most of the time. Less than 1% reported you're not meeting their expectations at all. So really strong ratings there. From a change in quality, 89.7% said service remained good or improved. Importantly, with expectations, not too dissimilar from the residential or the electric side, whether it was residential or commercial. But the top three customer expectations among your irrigation folks were affordable prices, good customer service, and reliable service. Again, when we're watering crops and we need that water for our business, reliability is important. Our ability to budget is important. And then if there's an issue or a need, the ability to get a hold of you, whether it is to halt service, add service, increase, whatever the case may be, that communication channel is important. Now, when talking about the water distribution operator trust, WDOs are highly trusted as that resource. And this is an important one because 93.8% agreed that those WDOs are a highly trusted resource, with 80.2% of that group providing a strongly agree rating. And so when we look at ratings, sometimes it's the totality of agreement or satisfaction or trust in this case. And we want to look at how many are in the strongly category or versus those that are in the somewhat. And when talking about these WDOs, 80.2% provided that strongly agree statement. So very high trust. These folks are doing a really great job and they are trusted by your customers.
Yeah, that's great to hear.
Couple of other areas that we talked about and kind of the closing areas. Online water system, we saw roughly a 60-40 split of users using that online water system, and the 40.9% non-online users were asked to discuss their barriers to using that system. And largely it was just a preference to not do business online, just easier to call. So we talked earlier about some folks still like that personal interaction. Some want to use the digital system. It doesn't make one better than the other. It's just a preference. And that's exactly what the case was here. And then there was some folks, 45.4%, who needed information to log on or didn't know where to find it. So that's an opportunity that Constance, you and I discussed is here's an opportunity for increased communication. Of those folks not using that online system, some are just, having a little extra need for the first getting started piece, and then they can write down that username and password or save it, however, but then they get into the system and can start using it. But again, we find with high performing utilities, your folks that are working with your customers are liked and they're doing a great job. And so they like that relationship of working with folks that they have for a long time. On the communication opportunity side, as folks started to understand, and we talked a bit about this today, about being a community-owned utility, and what that means is a different level of care and value. And we saw that almost 60%, 58.7%, were aware that TID is a public utility. However, 16.5% said that you're an investor-owned, and another 24.8% didn't know. And again, this is not a negative. It just means that they trust you and they're not paying as much attention. But we do know if we can take that 17% who said investor owned, we take that 25% and we make them aware that you are a community owned, utility, that will bring additional value, to them and to you. But the majority who knew enough did provide the right answer. And again, that publicly owned utility, we do know the value. And once they are more aware, they too will understand that value.
And that's a great opportunity for TID to capitalize on.
For sure. And listen, you're no different than any other community owned utility across the United States struggling with that same thing. So if that's your biggest crutch to bear in all of this, then that's okay. Last couple of areas, irrigation rules. We saw that 41% of respondents either didn't know that TID had irrigation rules or didn't know where to find them. And so in this particular case, don't knows are not dissatisfaction, as we talked about earlier. But again, there is some opportunity when we see those don't knows. That is a flag for us that we need something to do here.
Absolutely. And we're already working on that. We've got some plans in process for 2026 to help better educate on those irrigation rules. So another great takeaway from the survey.
Awesome. And then the last areas were, kind of strategic planning in nature. And when we talked or looked at and ranked their top priorities, increasing storage was the highest ranked priority. Reducing spills was the lowest ranked priority. So this also becomes, as you do your planning, gives you a little direction of where they see the highest level of impact for them.
And what's especially interesting about that is that increasing storage, as you mentioned, was the highest, and reducing spills at the end of the system was the lowest. What reducing spills is a form of holding onto that water and storing that water. So they're really kind of one and the same, but it just shows that that's not the way our customers currently perceive it. So again, that's an opportunity for TID to better communicate on why it's important for us to reduce those spills, which now is seen as a lower priority, but really is just as impactful as what our customers named as the highest priority. So again, great takeaways for us from this first time irrigation survey, and lots of opportunity for us to take actionable steps on behalf of our customers.
Awesome. I love to hear that.
All right. So we talked a little bit about, how TID's results kind of compare, as you noted in the PPDS, but let's talk a little bit more about that and how we use that data.
Yeah. So great question. And I think at the end of the day, if I had to sum up TID as a utility, I sum up how you're doing with your customers. I sum up how you compare. At the end of the day, you are in the higher end of ranking as it pertains to service and all these different areas that we measure, not only in California, but across the country. You're in the higher end of the spectrum of your peers in terms of how you all are providing service. It's, at GreatBlue, we talk a lot about providing boardroom ready research. And what that means is, as your strategic planning, as your leaders are deciding what we need to do for the utility, for our customers, it's having information that's actionable. And so you all continue to do that. You're surveying your customers with some regularity. You're diving into the data. You're making changes. You're communicating. You're updating folks. You're educating them. And as a result, your numbers are high, and they're high with every audience that you're surveying and serving, as well as high in delivering, right? So there's all three audiences: irrigation, commercial, residential. You're providing a high level of service across the board, but you're not taking that level of service for granted. You continue to look for ways to be better. And I think your customers know that. And if they didn't, they wouldn't be providing the ratings that they are. Now, where there are lower ratings, much like we talked about earlier, it's really related to don't knows or lack of awareness as opposed to dissatisfaction. And that's really important because serving customers and serving the public is a moving target to begin with. But when you ask them what's important and how are we doing on what's important to you, they're giving you that information. So they're telling you what they know. They're telling you what's important. You're making adjustments to that. That's part of the process. But you're doing a great job with it. And kudos to your customers as well. It's not always what people want to do is answer a survey in their free time. But I hope we've really shared today the value and importance of that information. And it's not a damaging budget line item. The money spent compared to the time and aggravation that we can save your customers, in our opinion, is a great value for the cost. But the time that they spend with us is a great value, I hope, for their time as well, because we get to look at what you're doing well for them. We get to look at what is important to them, and you get to make those improvements and those adjustments to help them have that best experience with you. So great job. Keep up the great work. And we're really happy and thankful to be a part of that process.
Well, we certainly appreciate having GreatBlue on board to help us through all this. And yeah, we've kind of set a high bar for ourselves, but we're a very internally competitive group, and we definitely want to work to keep that bar high on behalf of all of our customers. So it's definitely it's information that, as I mentioned earlier, is actionable, and it really does help us shape our programs and services and the way we interact with our customers, and we look forward to continuing that. And so, yeah, hopefully the next time we put out our promotional materials, please take our survey. Your feedback is important. After hearing our discussion today, our customers, that will resonate a little bit more with them. And who knows, maybe we'll even see those response numbers go up.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Very good. Well, Michael, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast today. And we look forward to working with GreatBlue again very soon.
Our pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you so much as always, and always happy to help you all out. Thanks again.
Awesome. Thank you for tuning in to the TID Water and Power Podcast. You can find TID on Facebook at facebook.com/TurlockID, on Instagram at TurlockID, and on LinkedIn as the Turlock Irrigation District. I'm your host, Constance Anderson. We'll see you again next time.